Okay, it's December 29, 2014, and we're here doing a biographical interview of Mary Sproul. I am Kevin Sullivan, her son-in-law, and we're here in Wilmington, Delaware. So why don't we go ahead and begin. Can you tell me your full name?
Mary Beatrice Sproul.
And where and when were you born?
I was born October 27, 1931 in Aarau, Switzerland.
And do you remember the name of the hospital?
Hospital, Aarau Hospital.
There was one.
Cantonale Spital. It's the hospital of the whole county there.
And who were your parents?
My parents were Helene Schneider Grüninger, and my father's name was Emil Schneider.
And you had siblings. Tell us who they were and their birth years, if possible.
Okay, I have two sisters. My sister Monica was born January 24, 1927. And then my sister Agnes was born February 23rd, 1930.
Very good. And so let's go back to your parents. So why don't you tell us about your father, where he came from, what he did for a living, and what he was like.
My father grew up on a farm in Lenzburg. It's not a big farm, it was a big family. He had 12 siblings, a total of 13 children. And he once said, "I didn't really have a childhood. When I was 5 years old, they put me in the field and said work." So it was pretty much school and work. He never complained, that's just the way it was in those days. It was not an easy life. He was very intelligent and did extremely well in school. And when he was 16, when you are allowed to, it's not obligatory to continue school, his parents said, "Hey, come on, Emil, up, on the farm work." And the parents and the minister from the church, and they all walked all the way out to the farm to beg the parents to let him go on to school, but no way. And he did not rebel or anything like that. It's just the way it was. So he worked on the farm, and then eventually he and one of his brothers, Alfred, bought out all the other kids, and they ran the farm together when they grew up and got married. So we did not live on the farm. My uncle Alfred did with his wife and 4 daughters. And my father and my mother and 3 daughters lived in a very lovely small house about a 5-minute walk from the farm.
And so how did he meet your mother?
And my mother was from a wealthy family in St. Gall, Switzerland. She was a rather spoiled, rich girl, had never worked. She was a wonderful piano player, and life was easy until the 20s when her father lost all his money. He went bankrupt. He had a small business and that didn't work out. So she and her sister, my Aunt Cecile, moved to Lenzburg, and the reason was that Cecile was running a school for girls to learn gardening. She had a certificate in gardening and a teacher's certificate, and she ran this school near Lenzburg. And my mother was with her. My mother sewed very well, and she sewed for the ladies in Lenzburg. She sewed like lace on underwear, very fine work, did a very good job. And so the two of them managed, and that's how she met my father, because she rented an apartment in the 3-flat where my grandparents lived at that time, after they, stopped working on the farm. And that's how she met my father.
And so what was your father like?
My father was a very serious, stern man. What I remember that some little girl in school, when I was like in 2nd or 3rd grade, I once said, "I want you to come to my house." And she said, "No, I don't want to, I don't dare, I'm afraid of your father." And I was like, what is she talking about? Because he was an absolute pussycat at home. He adored us girls. He was very, very nice. Yes, he didn't talk much, but when he talked, it was something of substance. He read a lot. He was well read. Of course, what I remember is the Second World War. He was very interested in politics, and at lunch, which was the big meal of the day, we always listened to the news. The news came in on the radio at 12:30, and did we ever not dare to say a single word? If we made a sound, we got really not yelled at, but be quiet, because the news then were so important, and my father wanted to hear everything, so he was very well informed. Read the paper, but also he read books. I guess we're still talking about my father. Yeah, but then he did very well, especially during the war, because he was trading with horses. He bought the horses usually in Hungary and other Eastern European countries. And when the war broke out, of course he couldn't travel anymore anyway, but he had about 20 horses for selling. And the army wanted all the horses they could get. So all 20 horses were, inducted into the army. And that went on for 5 years, and that paid very, very well. So my father helped Alfred around the farm, but also we had this income from the horses. And he would, pick them up and get new ones and whatever. But so that was his business.
And then how about your mother? What was she like?
And my mother adjusted very well to the simple life, which she had not had before, because she grew up in this wealthy environment with all her relatives in Sangal. But she never missed that. She didn't. She was doing very well in Lenzburg. She never had to work outside the house, which in those days would have been very unusual anyway. She played tennis. She was a wonderful athlete. She played very good tennis. She always played the piano. I would come home from school and would hear this wonderful piano playing. She also played when we went to bed. I remember, going to sleep, listening to my mother playing. She did the housework, whatever. She had friends. She was popular. Her friends were mainly from the tennis club. They got together occasionally. Yeah, we did a lot of walking. We went to the mountains every summer. We went for 3 weeks up into the Alps and hiked, and that's how I probably acquired my love of nature, hiking, mountains. Yeah.
Great. So tell us about your sisters.
Monica was the eldest, as I said, and she was sort of the brain of the family. Well, not of the family, but of us 3 girls. She was very smart, loved school. She was a brilliant student. Monica, she was I didn't get along well with her as a child. She was 5 years older, and Agnes and I were very close. We were 18 months apart, and we would make her life miserable. We would hide her books just to tease her, and then she would get very annoyed. She really was very angry with us a lot. But once we grew up, we were very, very fond of each other. She was a very, very lovely lady.
And how about Agnes?
Agnes was she looked very much like my father's family. She was, sure, the best looking of the 3 of us. She was quite beautiful, and had a lot of boyfriends, and she was a lot of fun, wonderful dancer. When she met her boyfriend, who became later her husband, they did a lot of dancing together. She went to commercial college and worked as a secretary before she got married.
And what was your childhood like during and after World War II?
Well, as I said, we lived near the farm. It was half an hour walk to school, and in those days you had to go home for lunch. There was no such thing as a school lunch. So we would walk half an hour to school in the morning, half an hour back for lunch, back to school at 2 o'clock, lunch from 12 to 2. So there was a lot of back and forth. I remember I saw sort of a road when I looked from the garden over past the farmland. There was this road, and occasionally I would see cars and I would think, oh, I wish I was in a car and went to a city. I thought it was very boring to live out in the country. There was really just fields and forests, and I couldn't really socialize much because we lived so far from town that it wasn't like a matter of going out and playing with my friends. So it was pretty much my sister and me, and then my cousins on the farm. We played with them too. We had to help on the farm work, which I hated, but that was something we had to do. My mother didn't. My mother told me once when when my father asked her to marry him, she said, yes, I'll marry you, but I have one condition. And he said, what is that? And she said, I will never work in the fields. That's not something I'm used to, and that's something I want to do. And he said, that's fine. And he, of course, kept the promise. She had a garden. She liked gardening, just in a little way for our own vegetables and so on. But never in the field. But the girls, we had to go. We had to pick potatoes and big carrots. I don't know what you call those in English. Huge for cows, big something. A little with the hay. That was hard work. I didn't do much of that.
So tell us about your education in Switzerland.
Yeah, of course, there's all public school. Primary school, and then I don't know what you call that. Another 4 years, and then you had a choice to, if you wanted to go to the university, you went to gymnasium, so you got Latin and Greek and those kind of subjects. I went to a school where, because I thought I was going to I wanted to become a baby nurse, and that sort of a school preparatory for that kind of education. And that was 2 years. And I did that, but then I changed my mind about the nursing school and went to a secretary school instead, and then worked in offices.
And where were the offices?
Well, I had my main really good job was in Zurich, and I moved to Zurich. I shared an apartment. No, I didn't share an apartment in Zurich. I had an apartment of my own and worked for a small company, which actually involved traveling. It was a wonderful job. I had to do traveling for the company, and it was an American company, and we were their representatives, so I had to speak a lot of English, which was very good.
So what did you do after that phase in that administrative work?
Oh, I forgot. I wanted to go to America, and I did. But in order to get a visa to work in America, I needed a sponsor, and that was very difficult to find somebody who would sponsor me, because it meant they would guarantee that in case I would be destitute, they would support me or get me back home or whatever. But eventually, my uncle, the brother of my mother, who was also in business in Zurich, he had a customer, and it was one of the Marcus brothers from Neiman Marcus, Herbert Marcus. And he was in Zurich, and he said, would you know of a girl who would be a nanny to my 2 children? We would pay her trip over and sponsor her, and so on and so forth. So my uncle said, well, maybe my niece would be interested. And he called me, told me about it. And although being a nanny was not really what I had in mind, but I wanted to go to America. I said, yes, I'll go. And they started this rolling, and within a few months I flew to Dallas, Texas, and stayed with the Marcus family, looking after their 2 children for a while. Then something happened in that family that they had to separate for a couple of years, and so they offered me a job in Neiman Marcus, but it was so poorly paid that I said no thank you. And I traveled to San Francisco with a Swiss girl I had met in Dallas. She and I just took the Greyhound bus, traveled to California via Mexico City. Actually, we made a detour to Mexico. We were very adventurous, and arrived in San Francisco and found jobs in offices. I worked for Westinghouse, and so I lived there for a couple of years and learned English and saw some of America.
So in those days, say in Dallas or San Francisco, in Dallas, did you get around town and meet people?
Oh yes, I did. Oh yes. Yes, in Dallas, the Marcuses were, I think it was Presbyterians, and somehow they got me into the youth group, so I would meet some young people, and that was very nice. So I had a little bit of a social life when I had time. And then when I left them and worked in the office, of course, I met people through the office and through my Swiss friend. Yeah, we had a great time. Went to the beach a lot. We had some friends with a car, oh, big deal, and would go to the beach on weekends, and went to Yosemite Park, just the usual, yeah.
So then what brought you back to Switzerland?
Well, by then my father was not well and turned out to be cancer, and I knew that. In those days they didn't tell the patient. They didn't tell my mother it was cancer, but the doctor told us. So I felt I wanted to go back home because of my father. So I went home, and he died in 1957, and I went back home in 1954. So it was a slow process.
And what were you doing in Switzerland during those years?
That's when I worked in Zurich, and I had this job in the American company. I had it mixed up and I started talking about America. That was actually later. America came first, came back home, and had this job for this representative in Zurich. And I had my own apartment and had some good friends.
Very good.
But I would go home every weekend to visit my parents.
You know, you were a child during World War II. What was it like in Switzerland during World War II?
Yeah, of course we were very fortunate that we were never attacked by the Germans, but there was always the fear that they would also overrun our country. So we were prepared. Most young men were in the army. So the women started to go to work. They had to work in the factories and, you know, take on a lot of jobs that the young men did when they were home. So a lot of men were in the army. I was a little schoolgirl. We had a lot of fire drills, alarms. Rationing was very severe. And we were not allowed anymore to have a garden. Nobody was allowed to have like a lawn in front of their house. Everything had to be converted into vegetable gardens. And so, like in our case, since we had the farm anyway, my mother really didn't want a bigger vegetable garden, but we had a big lawn, and so my father planted potatoes there. So we had like a potato field in front of our house. Rationing, what else was I going to say? Oh yeah, we were only allowed to have meat certain 3 days a week or something like that, and the police actually controlled that. They would go into people's kitchen to see what they were cooking. And if you were cooking meat on the days where you were not supposed to, you got fined. So that's how they enforced that. Well, It just seemed a long time, and a lot of fear. And my father was too old. He was over 40. So he was not in the army, but his brother was, Uncle Alfred, so my father had to do a lot more work on the farm and so on. But he was with us, he was home. And then with the horses and all that, that was his business. That's really all I can think of now.
Okay. So we're going to flash forward. You had just been in the United States the first time as a young lady, working, and then you came back to Switzerland. So let's pick it up there. When did you come back to Switzerland?
I think I came back in '54 and started working in Zurich in that small office where I did a lot of traveling, and it was sort of a glamorous job. It was very good, and I had a lot of responsibility. Then at some point I met a young man and I got married, young Swiss, Andreas Zender. But that didn't work out. We were not compatible, and we separated a year later, which was a good thing. It would never have worked out. No children, fortunately. And we got divorced, and I went back to my old job. Somehow my boss just at that time had lost the person who replaced me. She got married, so I went back and worked on that same place again. And then I met Alex in 1959 or 60, I think. 1960.
So Alex Sproul. So how did you meet him, and what was he doing?
Alex was lived in Chicago. He was working for United Airlines, and he had a counterpart in Switzerland, Swissair, who did the same kind of work, and I'm afraid I don't remember what that was. And they would always exchange ideas and experiences and so on, and at some point Swissair told their employee, Hans Steil, why don't we invite this Alex Sproul over to see our facilities and discuss business and so on. And that was Alex's first trip to Europe. And he and Hans, Swissair was very generous. They allowed Hans to drive him around, show him Switzerland, and then do the business and all that. And one time they were downtown Zurich and they went out for lunch, and they went to the Mövenpick restaurant on Paradeplatz in Zurich. And that was a very crowded place, and in those days they just sat people next to each other. So they sat at a table with 3 young women who were working for CBS and talked about it. They were Swiss. They started to chat, they all spoke English, and there was a very nice talk. And then Hans and Alex went back to the office, and Hans said, that one girl was really pretty. Why don't you call and ask her for a date? And Alex was like, oh no, come on, that's not my style. And yeah, she was pretty, but well, it wasn't me, it was somebody I know, Lottie. But anyway, Hans made such a nuisance of himself that Alex did call and talked to Lottie and asked her out, and she was not sure about that, but Alex said, why don't you bring a friend? So Hans and I and you and a friend, we can go out for dinner. And she did, and she called about a dozen of her friends, and I think I was the last one she called. And I didn't want to do this either. It was a rainy night, but she insisted, and one thing led to another, so I said, well, all right. And that's how I met Alex. We had dinner out in Schinsnach-Bad in a very nice restaurant. And then we corresponded for quite a while, and maybe 6-7 months later Alex came to Chicago. No, what am I talking about? The other way around. He came back to Zurich to spend a week with me. I took some time off, we did some traveling around and visited my sisters, who were both married by then, and my father had died 1957. And he went back, and correspondence back and forth, and then I came over to Chicago to visit him. But then I went back again because I didn't have the right kind of visa. But then I came back and we got married in May of 61
In Chicago.
in Chicago. We just went to City Hall. We didn't even have, Alex hadn't lived here very long. We didn't have any witnesses. We went to City Hall, stood in line, and there was a Latino couple behind us, and we turned around and said to them, "Would you mind being our witnesses?" And they said, "Sure." And that's how we got married. And Alex had to go back to work because he had taken so many vacation days visiting me in Switzerland that he couldn't take vacation, couldn't even take a day off to get married. And we lived on Sheridan Road, 6030 Sheridan Road, in a very nice apartment overlooking the lake, which Alex had rented before I came. And that was a wonderful place to live.
Excellent. Okay, well, in the next one, we'll pick it up with the Chicago years. So tell us a little bit about, when your kids came along and that phase of your life.
Okay, of course we still lived in the apartment in the high-rise in Chicago on Sheridan Road with a view on the lake, and that was all very exciting. I just loved it. I said I never want to live anywhere else in Chicago. It was just so exciting. And shortly before then, I was expecting Nazy, and shortly before she was born in October, I waited for the elevator, forget which floor we were on, which always took a while, and then I heard, just when the elevator came, I heard a door go, and I, being such a polite, nice person, I looked around and saw some young woman come running, and I said, "Are you waiting? You want the elevator?" Yes, and she came on, and her name was Inge Koppenhofer, and she was German, and she was expecting a baby, and we got to talking in the elevator, and then we became best friends. Because I didn't know anybody in Chicago really, except the people Alex worked for, and they mostly lived in the western suburbs. So that was really, really nice, because Inge, we just hit it off so well, and after a while, a few weeks I think, we got the husbands together, and then they hit it off so well. Rolf was a German diplomat. He worked for the consulate in Chicago, the German consulate, and very, very educated. And he and Alex would just discuss history and correct each other's dates for hours, and we just had a lot of fun. So I had a friend, which was important. And then Nazy came along, and we thought, oh, this is going to be no problem at all. We had a one-bedroom apartment. We put the crib in the bedroom and brought Nazy home, and she was such a good baby. However, after about 2, 3, 4 nights, we realized she made funny little noises at night and kept us awake. We would wake up, and there she was, whatever little babies do. I don't quite remember. So we had to start moving that crib, which did not fold. It was quite something to move it from the bedroom to the living room, and we did that every night. So we decided we better move, and we looked for another apartment and decided on Evanston because we liked Evanston. That was close and cosmopolitan with the university and all that. So I think we moved to Evanston sometime in, she was born in 61. Must have been in 62. Yeah, right. And we lived in a 2-flat, also not too far from the lake on Elmwood. And that's where we stayed for 7 years, I believe. And then in the meantime, Nelson was born, and then we bought a house on Judson in 71. That sounds about right. And
so tell me about raising the 2 kids in Evanston.
yeah, Yeah. When Nancy was ready for kindergarten, this was the year Evanston got integrated. And the first year in 67, I believe, they decided to change the school in the black area, the foster school, which was all black. And that's where they started the lab school, and children got bused from all over. And so it was an integrated class. So when Nancy started kindergarten, actually I have to back up. When she started kindergarten, it was still an all-black school, and only the kindergarten was integrated. And I remember when she came home the first day from kindergarten, she said to me, "Are all schools have only black children?" Because she was quite confused, obviously, because except for the kindergarten, all the other classes were all black children. So that was sort of an interesting experience for her. But she had kindergarten there and was bused every day. And then in first grade, the whole school got integrated. And that's where she and then later Nelson went to school up to junior high, being bused, which had a disadvantage that they didn't really meet neighborhood children as easily. But it was okay. They say it was too... The school was, they didn't learn anything. That's what they say, but I don't think that's true. So that was the primary school.
So tell us tell us what Nancy was like as a child, and what was Nelson like as a child.
Well, Nancy was very easy. She was I think she must have been a teacher's pet, because she always did what she was told, and she was very compliant. She was smart. She got along with everybody. So she was just a terrific little girl. Nelson was a little more difficult. He had his own way. As one teacher said, he's unteachable and unsupervisable. But he did okay. Of course, he was smart enough, but I think he was probably bored in school.
So tell me, what was your life like coming from Switzerland in the U.S.? What were some of your observations when you first came to the U.S. in the 60s?
Well, I think I immediately was delighted with the friendliness. In the Midwest, how friendly people were, much friendlier to strangers than maybe the Swiss would have been. I think that has changed too, because it's more cosmopolitan over there too. But very friendly, very... we joined the Unitarian Church in Evanston, and I did make friends rapidly. Yeah, I found life very pleasant.
And how was the U.S. different from Switzerland?
Well, I don't know.
Okay, let's talk about you would often take the family back to Switzerland to see your parents and to see relatives and to visit the mountains. Tell me about those trips back.
Yeah, we would go back every year. I would stay with my mother in Lenzburg, and I remember trying to do some excursions with the kids. I didn't really care to drive all over the place, so I remember a bus trip. I think it was a bus to a town where the Swiss circus, which is called Knie, had their residence, and we could see animals there, sort of a zoo type environment. We did that once. So we did excursions like that. Otherwise, we would go to Aarau, where my sister Agnes lived, and her kids, Priska, Stefan, Corinne, and Irene, were similar ages, and they played together, and I think, and my kids particularly liked actually to go to Basel, because the Basel boys, Niels and Eric, had this incredible train set, and that was a big attraction, especially for Nelson. I think that was just wonderful. They had a whole room with this train set up, and they would always love to go to Basel. And I was very close to my sister Monica. I was close to both sisters, but maybe more to Monica than to Agnes. And that was very important to see them and be with them.
Can you talk about your relationship with your two sisters in adulthood, what they were like and how you kept up with them?
Well, we, of course, in those days, no emails, so I wrote a letter every week. Every Tuesday I wrote a letter to my mother, who expected that. If that letter didn't come by Saturday, apparently, I was told she would start worrying. What's the matter with Mary? Where are they sick? Or what happened? And so that letter was important. And on Tuesdays, sometimes I did not feel like writing a letter, but I just forced myself. And once I started writing, I would tell her about the kids and about life in Evanston. And then I also, at some point, my sister Moni was very enamored with Wagner operas, and she was able to get tickets in Bayreuth for the Wagner. Every August there's like a Wagner festival there. All his operas are performed, and I think I must have been there 4 or 5 times with her. She would invite me to see these incredible performances at the Opera House in Bayreuth, Germany, which was built by Richard Wagner. And that was a tremendous experience and very special, because it's extremely hard to get tickets for everybody. It's a lottery. People that write in a year in advance to try to get tickets. But Moni was a friend of Bayreuth, which I'm sure cost her dearly, but that was important to her, and she always got 2 tickets. And since Julie was not an opera fan, she would invite me. So that was very, very nice to do this with her for quite a few years.
Before we leave the topic of Switzerland and travel there, just tell me, across the years, from the time you came to the U.S. in the 60s until now, how often do you go to Switzerland? Where do you go? Where do you like to go? Who goes? Tell me about trips back.
Well, we always went to the mountains because we like hiking. We did that, and as I said, of course, we visited the sisters. Now Alex and I love Italy, so we've gone to Italy several times on trips. One time we went with our neighbors, the Mittmans, and rented a car and drove in France, and that was a wonderful trip. We started out in Lyon and drove through those small French towns. It was so beautiful. Another time Alex and I traveled to Venice, and that was in January, when there are no tourists, and we were lucky the weather wasn't bad, and that was a memorable trip, and we just loved Venice.
And then how about the last several years? Where have you been going?
Well, the last several years we usually just go to Switzerland. We go to Lenk, a small town in the Bernese Alps, and stay in a condo that belongs to Karin, my niece, that is Monica's daughter. And we usually go for about a month and do hiking and do day trips, and that's about it. That's what we really enjoy doing. We don't really do that much other travel anymore.
And of course, you've had your grandchildren with you in Lenk and in other towns in Switzerland. Right. Tell me about bringing your grandchildren to Switzerland.
Yeah, that is nice that they seem to like it there. They come and we all stay together in the condo, and we go hiking, and again we do some day trips to Bern. They've all been to Bern and to Thun. That's always a fun time, which, together in my country, and so they get an idea where their ancestors came from.
So let's shift back to life in Chicago. You and Alex were members of the Unitarian Church in Evanston and still are for many years, and you've been active there. Tell me about the activities you've done with the Unitarians.
Well, we're not so active anymore, but I used to be in the choir quite a few years, and I loved that. Alex did just about everything. He was treasurer, and he was on the board maybe more than once. He was board president, and so we were very active in the past. But now our interests maybe have shifted a little bit. Alex takes classes at the University of Chicago. He took the basic program, which was a 5-year series of classes. It's mainly a glorified book club, but he loves that, reading the classics and humanist literature. I've gotten very involved with the Alliance Française on the North Shore. That's people who love the French language. I met French people, Belgians, quite a few Americans who speak French. We get together 2, 3, 4 times a month or more, and I made some very good friends. So that has really been, I've been much more active in that than in the Unitarian Church. Somehow you shift, and this is my interest now. I also take a class, and I'm in charge of the class and find the students and organize it.
So tell me about your relationship with languages. Which ones do you speak, and how do you find them all to go? Which ones do you do best with?
Well, of course, my first language is German. I still speak German, the Swiss dialect. Since I go back every year, I have no problem with that either. I speak French, and with all my French activities, I have become quite fluent again. I used to speak fluently Italian, but I forgot a lot of that. It probably would come back. I lived in Italy many years ago when I was single. I studied in Florence and lived in Milan, worked there. What else do I speak? French, Italian, German, English. Yeah, I guess that's about it. I love languages. I read German books, a lot of French books. I'm in two book clubs for French, discuss books and short stories. So that's a big interest of mine. Love languages.
Tell me about your life singing in the choir at church.
Well, that was socially, that was so much fun. I just enjoyed that group a lot, and I love music, and we had a good director who tried to find different, modern, not just church singing at all, classic and modern, and so that was a great experience. I don't have much of a voice, but I really enjoyed the group, and the singing with the group is really great. I recommend it for anybody. Yeah.
Tell me about who are some of your great friends in Chicago over the years? Who comes to mind, and what did you like about them?
Well, what comes to mind is my friend Libby, with whom I walked every day, Monday to Friday, not Saturday and Sunday. Every morning we met, I think at about 8:30. She lived in the neighborhood, and we would walk along the lake for about an hour for many years. So when you see somebody every day, we really became good friends. And unfortunately, she passed away last January, and that's been a big loss for me. I miss Libby a lot. I have other friends now, especially in the French group. I have a friend Mary Paula, who's married to a Swiss, and that somehow there's a fun connection there. She's been to Switzerland. They go all the time, although she's American, but loves Switzerland. And she's a very fun person. And Linda Martin, another good friend. And then in the building, since we moved from the house to a condo downtown Evanston in 2013, and I'm very good friends with one woman who lives on the same floor, and with whom I also walk in the morning. There 6 women. We meet 3 mornings a week and walk along the lake. And that's very nice, and they are my friends too. So, yeah, I feel I have a very good social life and enjoy the relationship with these ladies very much.
So tell me from A to Z the story of Travel in the Main, the founding of the business, what it was like, what your role was, and how what a great part of your life that was.
Yeah, that was in '76. Alex lost his job at United and looked around what to do. He interviewed and this and that, but he always wanted his own business. So he, after some research, decided to open a travel agency. I was pretty scared. I think Nasia Nelson once said, "That's the year Mommy cried every day." I hope it's an exaggeration, but I was very worried. You don't just start a business. That's not the Swiss way. It was scary. But we did, and we started out with just Alex and me, and we had to hire somebody who knew how to write an airline ticket. And that was Jean Ritchie, a young woman who turned out to be an excellent employee. So the 3 of us struggled through the first few years. Traveling was fun in that respect, especially for me. We couldn't really leave together because somebody had to be in the business. We were so small. But I took a lot of what we call fam trips, familiarization trips, for travel agents, and I enjoyed that part. They were usually short, and like you went to Australia and you stayed 1 week and traveled all the time, which is not the way I like to travel by myself, but it was a way to be able to see these continents and countries. Been to China, to Japan, to New Zealand. So that was a nice perk. I enjoyed working in the travel agency a lot. I'm a people's person, and to arrange vacations for people, especially if they turned out well, was a great pleasure for me, and I think I did a good job. So we stayed in the business until 2001, and then came September 11, 9/11, and that was so devastating that we closed the agency, and we were able to sell our customer list to an agency in Evanston, and I went to work for them for a few years until I retired. Can't remember exactly now when. I think when I was 65 maybe, or yeah. I retired. Alex had retired when we closed the office. But it was good. That was '01. So we were in the business for 25 years. And didn't get rich, but it was okay. It was satisfying, and we made a living.
Sure.
Yeah.
And tell me about your approach to working with clients. How did you work with all these different kinds of people that wanted to travel?
Well, you listen. You do a lot of listening. Listen what they want to do, what they're like. Sometimes the difficulty was maybe husband and wife had different ideas about travel. So to figure out that they're both happy and get to do what they want to do was a challenge. But I think that was one of my strengths. I listened to people, and I understood what they were all about, and tried my best to arrange things to their liking. So that was very satisfying. Of course, we had eventually people. At some point we probably had maybe 8 agents working for us, so that was another aspect to manage all these people. That was not so easy, and that's the part we both never liked. They quit, and they're unhappy, and they fight. The little business world is not easy, but we managed. Yeah.
And what were your areas of geographic specialty?
Oh, mainly, of course, Switzerland for one, but Europe. I was very much the Europe person because I knew it so well. So, Switzerland, Germany, France, whatever you name it, I booked it all. Then when you take a trip and you come back, and all of a sudden you know more about maybe China, or when I went to Australia, and that helped a lot. And when people come in, you could say, I've been there, and So that's why the travel was so important. But my specialty was definitely Europe. Alex didn't really sell travel. He managed the office. Yeah.
And tell me about travel in the Main there in the Main Street area in Evanston. What were the other businesses? How did you all fit in?
Oh yeah, that was South Evanston business community, which Alex was very instrumental in. They used to call him the mayor of South Evanston. We knew all the businesses. There were, once in a while, there were meetings about issues in the area. That was rather nice to know the other merchants. It's not that big an area there. It's mainly just Main Street that has all the businesses. Downtown is 10 minutes away, so we were concentrated on the Main Street area. Yeah.
And so tell me about switching gears a little bit. Tell me about just your hobbies. Maybe tick through your interests over the years that you've had. You've touched on some of them, but you can say them again.
Yeah, of course the language. I read a lot. I knit. I walk, and I used to play tennis, so I loved that. Unfortunately, because of my arthritis, I couldn't do that anymore. I miss that. That was fun. Loved it. I had tennis groups I played with once or twice a week. What else do I do? I cook. Oh, I love to cook. So we still have company sometimes, and I love to experiment and cook new dishes. And Alex enjoys the experiments a lot. That's maybe why I do it, because he is so appreciative. So that was fun. And then visiting the kids now that, of course, they haven't lived in our area for a long time, so I love to go out to Berkeley to see Nelson and his family, and then Nazy and her family in Wilmington, Delaware, and that's a constant pleasure. And then they come, and they, as we already said, they come to Switzerland. They also come to Evanston, and now since we live in such a small place, we have to scramble a little when they come, but they still do, and we manage and have a good time. And I think the grandkids all love Evanston. It's just interesting. They all want to come. The beach and living in the town. So that's a lot of fun.
Now, you used to organize tours with people. Tell me about taking people to Switzerland and other places on package trips.
Right. We have taken tours to Switzerland, of course, and we would do we would lead the hikes, which, looking back, I find was pretty courageous, but I never really thought about it. What I mean with courageous, because it turns out when you take Americans to the Alps, they don't really know what that's all about, and even if they think they're in good condition, to walk up those mountains is a little different. So that was a challenge. We used to, Alex used to take the better walkers and I would take the slow ones, because it never worked out that the whole group could walk at the same pace. And the faster ones would have to wait and be impatient and not liking that. But those trips were big success, and some of those people still talk about them. We also took a group to South America, to Peru and Machu Picchu, to the Galapagos. We went to Costa Rica several times with groups, and that was not difficult. We just chose some nice destinations and got some guides, and that was great. I think that's about it for tours.
So tell me, switching gears, tell me about Alex. What do you really appreciate about Alex, and what do you love about it?
Well, one thing about Alex is traveling with him is pure pleasure. He researches the destinations. He have his suitcases full of books, as Nazy and Nelson know well and used to complain about, that he's always looking at books and reading when we want to do things. But I appreciate it. You visit something with him and he will know all about it and the history and just everything about places we visit. So that is great fun. Yeah, he's extremely knowledgeable and I appreciate that, and makes me probably lazy because he knows it all and can tell me about things. Then of course we have common interests like theater and music. We've been members, we've had season tickets to the Chicago Symphony since 1961, just for 54 years. We now get invited to quite a fancy dinner once a year, oh no, it's a lunch, with other people who've been members 50 years or more, and they come in wheelchairs and on stretchers. But they come to those lunches and it's rather nice. Yeah, theater, concerts. What else do we do?
And what personal qualities of Alex do you like?
Well, he's a kind, good person, very attached to the family, would do anything for the kids and grandkids. Just really a wonderful person. His integrity is super, very generous. I can only say good things.
And then how about this son of yours, Nelson? What do you love? Tell me about Nelson.
Oh, Nelson is very special. Also, I think a very good person. I always think if whatever something goes wrong, Nelson will be there and help and do everything for us. So that's a really good feeling. And the same goes for Nancy, good people. Yeah, Nelson is very special.
How would you describe Nelson to someone who hasn't met him?
Well, an independent thinker, unteachable, unsupervisable, has his own way of learning things, of teaching things, but great fun to be with, wonderful sense of humor, just a great son. And Nancy is wonderful daughter. We get along extremely well. When she calls, it's great fun always to talk to her. And when they come to Switzerland, and last year they came, just Nelson and Nancy alone for 1 week, and that was really special. We pretended it was like in old times, and that worked well. Yeah, we feel both very fortunate having children who are such good people. So.
So just wondering, what is your advice for these 6 grandchildren of yours that you've learned in life?
Well, learn from your mistakes, and I certainly had to do that, especially with having been married twice. First marriage, that was not a good experience, of course, as you can imagine, but I learned a lot about listening to each other, being patient, if you're angry, to talk about it and get it out and make up. So that's, and also in the agency, supervising people, that's always a challenge, and I remember I really didn't like to do that, but you have to. And again, listening to people is important. Listen to them and be patient and not give up. I'm basically a happy person, so it's not so difficult to, I think people enjoy being with me because I'm not a whiner and complaining. It's another thing about complaining. Look forward, don't complain about things all the time. That doesn't help. Can you go back? Or?
Yeah, we'll do it again. So what advice do you have for your grandkids?
Well, one advice would be, don't be afraid to make mistakes. Looking back to my life, I learned a lot from mistake, thinking primarily of my first marriage, which was not good and was not a good experience. sort of a disaster. But I learned from that. Also, trust your instincts. Don't give up. Listen to people or listen to friends. And don't blame yourself for things. Being happy helps. Enjoy life. Do things you like to do. And if there's something you really don't want to do, don't force yourself. If you can.
What advice?
Well, don't be afraid to make mistakes. I learned that a long time ago when I first married. That was a disaster, but I got out of that luckily. And then when I later met Alex, I think I was an easier person to get along with. I was patient and listened to each other, and do things you enjoy. Just be happy, and if something doesn't work out, don't worry about it too much, or don't worry about not doing everything just so.
Good. So tell me about how you got into tennis and how it played out for you.
Well, I played tennis as a child, and actually it's surprising that I continued to play tennis because my mother was a very good tennis player. She was like number 2 in Lenzburg. There were 4 friends. She had 4 friends, all good tennis players, and she and Alice always competed who was better and who won more tournaments. Very, very good. And so was my sister Agnes. Nesi was a very good tennis player, partly because my mother taught her. They went to the court maybe every day, and my mother gave her a lesson. And at one point I said, I would like to learn to play tennis too. I was 18 months younger than Agnes. And my mother said, well, you're not so athletic. I don't think I have time to do that. That was not very nice. So if ever you have children, don't say something like that to your kid, because it made me, of course, I decided I'm a terrible tennis player and gave up right there. But then after I left Lenzburg and I lived in Zurich, some friend asked me if I would play tennis, and so I started again to play with other young women and enjoyed it very much. And then when I came to America, I played and then joined a tennis club and played double, and it became the athletic part. I was never very good, but I enjoyed playing with these friends, so that was fun. And then I had to quit because of arthritis when I got older, but I still enjoy watching tennis. I love the big tournaments. I watch all the big Federer and Nadal and Djokovic, and I get great pleasure out of that. So that's my favorite sport for watching and remembering how it was when I played.
And have you gone to any big tennis matches?
Nesi and I would go to, Nesi, my daughter, Danielle, to the US Open several times, and that was great fun. The biggest fun for me was to be with her, because it was just the 2 of us, and we would run around going from tournament to tournament and seeing all these big guns. That was terrific, and I hope we'll do it again. That is really fun. The atmosphere and the enthusiasm, I just loved it.